What's up, guys? It's your boy Zowoki, back at it with another Chris Watts video, and by popular demand, and I'm telling you, hundreds of you guys have been sending me this video, telling me I have to watch this. So with that being said, we're going to watch it because you guys have highly requested it. Now, I've talked with the man behind behind Criminal Minds. This man says go for it because you will not believe what's on this video. So with that being said, we're going to get into it. We're going to do a two-parter. I don't want to do this all in one video because it's a 2-hour video. So we'll do one here and then we'll do again one tomorrow. So make sure you guys stick around and watch both of them with my reaction and my input on Chris Watts' behind the Criminal Minds video of A Deal with the Devil. Chris Watts. I'm hoping it's something to do with Nichol as well. It also states in search of justice, which that's what we're here for. So with that being said, before we go any further, if you guys could do me a solid favor, which thank you guys so very much for the thousands of you guys, or 37,000 of you guys so far. You guys are killing it. Let's continue that by subscribing, hitting the white bar icon next to it, hit the bell icon next to it, so when I do post a video like this one, you guys will get that little ring notification that I've posted that video, and then you guys can watch, comment, like, and share. Also, make sure you guys go over behind Criminal Minds. I've watched this man's stuff. Great work, great content. Go over there, give this man some love. Subscribe, comment, like, and share. And with that being said, let's get into the video. Before we go any further, I do want to make this very, very clear. I have to say this on every video because there are some strays that like to come at me very negative and very distraught in my educational videos that I try to put out there for you guys. I am not a professional. I am not educated in criminal justice. I am educated in graphic design and advertisement. I know I have education in diesel mechanics. I was in the military, nor do I have any background in criminal justice. I am doing this for one, I am wanting the justice completely for Chris Watts. Take that back. I want the justice of keeping Chris inside prison and doing the justice for getting Nichol Kessinger in prison. I worded it wrong. I do apologize. But again, I am not claiming I am a professional. I am not claiming I'm educated, nor am I a small-time junior detective, as in somebody had mentioned in a DA form. But I'm here to find the justice because I feel that some people on their side has not done their job, and I'm trying to put that, my conclusions, my theories, my opinions, my discoveries with the other people that are on here in that same boat, and hopefully we will find 100% justice for Shanann, Bella, Cece, and baby Nico. That's what I want to say. But let's continue.
The town of Frederick, Colorado became the epicenter of international attention as the layers of an unfathomable tragedy began to unfold.
Shanann Watts and her 2 daughters, 3-year-old Celeste and 4-year-old Bella, vanished on Monday. Their startling disappearance triggering a statewide alert as police and the FBI focus on her home outside Denver, where she was last seen.
But in the 5 years since the conviction of Chris Watts, attention has shifted in focus onto his mistress, Nichol Kessinger, due to the overwhelming evidence that has been leveled against her for having lied to law enforcement. Kessinger has garnered further scrutiny for having fundamentally altered her story during each of her interviews, and a litany of other disconcerting evidence that seems to indicate that she was hiding her own criminality in connection to this crime. But what if I told you that I believe I have stumbled onto the real reason why Nichol Kessinger was never investigated? And it involves a different case entirely. And when I show you its connection to the outcome and conviction of Chris Watts, I am confident you will understand exactly what went wrong and why. Since the beginning of this series, countless people have observed the compelling evidence against Watts' paramour and have unanimously asked one simple reoccurring question. What can be done present day to encourage law enforcement to open an investigation into Nichol Kessinger? And for the first time in the history of this case, we have a clear answer, and it comes directly from the one and only person who has ever had the power to investigate Nichol and his answer is an unambiguous response to you, the listener. It's a resounding answer to every concerned citizen, every mother, every father, and every person who remains committed to seeking justice for Shanann, for Bella, for Cece, and for Nico. In today's final video of the Chris Watts series, I will open a door into what I believe is the most important element you need to know in order to understand this case. We will review previously unreported facts in connection to the Watts conviction, including the compiled evidence from Nichol Kessinger's statements with law enforcement. Additionally, I will share with you my interview with the former homicide detective who will help us to understand the importance of what went wrong and why. With that homicide detective providing us a definitive answer to the question, can Nichol Kessinger's deleted text messages still be retrieved? And before this episode concludes, it is my hope that you will understand exactly what it will take for justice to become a reality.
First, I just want to talk about the speed of this case. You know, these murders happened just 3 months ago in August. This case is now already wrapped up with the plea and the sentencing today. How unusual is it to have such a high-profile case wrap up so quickly?
Oh, I think it's very unusual.
Because even if the path ahead is treacherous and challenging, I know that I am not alone when I say that advocating for the truth, it's worth the fight.
It is.
Because Shanann, Bella, Cece, and Nico, they deserve nothing less. This
Exactly.
is In Search of Justice, the final chapter of the Chris Watts case.
And for those that sit out there, it's just upsetting because I want to see justice for them, and people just think I'm looking for a payout. It's like, I'm not looking for a payout. I'm looking to find the 100% justice. And it's upsetting for some people that sit there and come in here and tell me I'm bored or I have nothing better to do. I have tons of better stuff to do. I have a family of my own, which I love very dearly. But I do this because this is not fair to those 4 souls that lost their life because he wanted to get his jollies off and she wanted to start a new life with this man when he was already married. That's why I do these videos.
Now, before we begin, I want to revisit some important disclaimers. Number 1, Chris Watts received the sentence he deserved.
Amen.
Period. I believe that he is exactly where he should
Amen.
be, regardless of what new or additional evidence may come out now or in the future.
Amen.
Number 2, we do not assign blame to any victim or their families for the crimes perpetrated against them, period.
Agreed.
Number 3, and most important of all, no one associated with this case should be contacted, harassed,
Agreed.
or slandered in any way, either on this platform or anywhere else. These are core values of this channel, and they always will be. So
Agreed.
without further ado, let's begin.
The Emperor's
When I
Clothes.
first began my analysis of the Chris Watts discovery records, I, like many others before me, saw a clear and undeniable pattern that Nichol Kessinger had repeatedly lied at every interaction she had with law enforcement. From the beginning, it has been clear to me that her lies should have brought her under the scope and scrutiny of their investigation.
Agreed.
But no matter where you land concerning her culpability, the evidence we've discussed over the last 2 episodes is considerable. And before I can explain to you how I believe justice is still possible, I would like to quickly revisit the facts that we've learned so far.
First lie.
On August 15th, 2018, Nichol Kessinger and her father, Dwayne Kessinger, met with the FBI at Majestic View Park in Arvada,
He should not be there. I mean her father.
Colorado. In that meeting, Kessinger would begin by offering her first of many demonstrably false statements.
He was in the process of a separation from his wife, and as far as I knew, that was becoming pretty finalized.
Nichole's first lie goes to the heart of this entire case, specifically Chris and Shanann's marriage. Her statement that she believed Chris and Shanann's divorce was nearly finalized would not stand true when viewed against the backdrop of her own Google searches conducted just 3 weeks prior to this interview. But the web of deceptions and misdirections that Nichol was weaving had only just begun.
Reflecting suspicion.
Monday afternoon, he told me that she was like gone and he didn't know where she was. And at that point, I don't think that it set off any alarms in my head, just because, I mean, I have friends that I text, and if I don't hear from them for like 3 hours or 6 hours or even like a couple days, I don't feel concerned about where they're at, because it's kind of a standard thing.
Who cares about your friends?
Just 10 seconds after her first lie to federal agents, Nichol Kessinger begins to explain that on Monday, the 13th of August, the same day that Shanann and her children are reported missing, she was not concerned about Shanann's disappearance for the entirety of that day. She initially repeats this claim in her interview the following day with Detective Kobach.
What were you thinking at that time?
This was like on Monday. Again, at that point, I was like, I still thought she left. I mean, this was all on Monday. Like, I legitimately thought this woman left the premises with her kids and just wanted nothing to do with him for like 24 hours.
But halfway through that second interview, Detective Kobach tells her that he's going to need her cell phone records, which forces her to have to explain her late night, hours-long phone calls to Chris throughout Monday evening. And it's at this point, with this new information in hand, that Nichol radically alters the entirety of her prior statements.
Oh, and like I kept telling him I was scared. I was really freaking scared. In fact, that's another thing I miss. I'm so tired. Monday night, like, I called him back in the middle of the night because I could not sleep. I could not sleep at all. And I remember when I called him, he sounded like he was sleeping. And I was like, how the hell can you sleep right now? I think that's exactly what I said to him. And he was just like, I'm just kind of dozing off and on the couch. And I just remember thinking, like, I haven't shut my eyes yet. And this is not even my family.
This always gets me. How would you not shut your eyes? You're the one that infiltrated a married man's life, ruined their family, and yet you can't sleep because of this? She's overemphasizing everything to make it look like she's innocent, purposely, and it sounds complete bull shiitake mushrooms, okay?
And so that happened on Monday night.
Yeah, well, all those phone calls at the very end of the night, that was me freaking out. Like, if you look at my texts, a lot of that was like, I can't sleep, I'm really scared, where's your family? That was like me freaking out, and him calling to like try to reassure me, or me calling him like, please talk to me, I'm super scared, where's your family? Like, those little ones at the very end of the night are me not being able to sleep and trying to get him to like talk to me about like, and just, I guess, making sure everything was okay. So that those like real late ones, and that's why they're all kind of like sporadic, because I'd be up for like an hour and then I'd fall asleep for like 15 minutes, and then I would like wake up and start stressing again and try to call them back. Like, so that's why there are all these like little sporadic ones.
She's stressing because she thinks she's going to get caught for her involvement. That's why she's stressing out.
At the end of the night, but those two big ones.
You don't need to be a member of law enforcement to understand or see why this foundational change to her story is extremely problematic. And yet, Nichol Kessinger was just getting warmed up.
Third lie, misleading and
Nichol repeatedly tried to downplay the serious nature of her relationship with Chris, and did so despite the mountain of evidence that completely contradicts those claims.
Was he in love with you? Were you in love with him?
I think it could have gotten there had things played out like in a decent manner.
Now, it's important to remember that if we use Nichole's own statements for that specific moment in time, She was already well aware that Shanann and her children were missing, so the claim that her relationship with Chris was little more than casual dating is laughably untrue. Wouldn't someone who is actually concerned with assisting law enforcement, someone who claims to have nothing to hide, want to tell the truth to assist in their investigation? Because if she really had nothing to hide, then why say this?
Did he say anything to you about where he thought the relationship was going to be going, or what he was hoping for the future?
I think that he was looking for a relationship with me, but I knew that he was in the process of a separation.
As we've learned in previous episodes, Detective Michael Prill's data report proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that the statements Nichol Kessinger just made are intentional fabrications. She routinely threw tantrums when Chris had to pay attention to his family, including becoming irate when he went with his family on vacation to North Carolina. Despite her inference that their relationship was little more than casual, she told Chris that she would give birth to his first son. Her Google searches further betray her attempts at deception and prove that she was completely enamored with him, which is precisely why she routinely sent him nude images on a near daily basis, sending Chris these lewd images even when she knew he was with his family. It's obvious to anyone paying any attention that Nicole's downplaying of her relationship with a married man was and is nothing more than a deliberate deception.
Agreed.
So when we spent time together, I didn't really go to his house. We would spend time at my house.
Were you ever at his house? Once. Okay.
As was the case with most lies that Nichol Kessinger would tell, the substance of the lie never lasts for long. This is especially true when Agent Kobach tells Nichol at their first meeting that he has already subpoenaed her phone records.
The only reason I asked, and I'm not really concerned about your location. I think we already have your cell phone records. At some point, did Mark ask you to supply? Did they ask for consent to get cell phone records? That'll probably be done by warrant. If we wanted,
what you just did?
Nope. What I'm talking about is your movement.
And it's at this moment that we see the mark of a seasoned pathological liar backed into a corner, coming to the realization that her lies are about to become obvious. So by the time the second interview ends, she reframes her prior testimony and informs Agent Kobach that in fact, she had been to Chris's house more than once. Exactly. And no matter how many times I replay these interviews, I am never able to withhold my shock and dismay at law enforcement's apparent refusal to ask any follow-up questions or to ever inquire as to why Nicole's statements have consistently and substantively changed at every new interaction.
Exactly.
But the one constant with Nichol that persists through every recorded exchange is her incessant inability to tell the truth. And that character flaw is about to take center stage.
Good. Fifth lie, avoiding the truth.
And did you guys, was there anything else was it just dinner? Did you go anyplace else? Visit any?
No, we just went to dinner. That's one of the only times I've actually ever been out in public with him.
Standing in the park with the FBI and her father, Dwayne, Nichol has been providing her initial statement for less than 10 minutes, and she has already told no less than 5 provable lies. Because as we know, and as law enforcement should have known, her visit to the Lazy Dog restaurant was absolutely not one of the only times that she went out in public with Chris Watts. In fact, she won't actually tell the truth about the multitude of times that they were out in public together until several weeks later, when again she finds out that Agent Kobach has just received a detailed summary of her cell phone records. And the proof that Nichol was deeply concerned about the clearly false statements that she was making to law enforcement is absolutely everywhere.
I don't know really know what to do. I feel like if I talk to them, they're either going to try to, like, find some holes in my story or try to get me to, like, be Chris's only ally, and I don't really feel like dealing with either one of those.
But easily the most damning lie that Nichol told during the course of her interactions with law enforcement is what ultimately convinced me that she is hiding something truly monstrous with respect to her involvement in this case.
I agree. Prove it.
So I talked to him on Sunday night, and he was fine on Sunday night. I didn't have any issues with him.
The first time Nichol is asked about Chris the night before he committed his crimes, she very clearly denies that she noticed anything suspicious about his behavior that night. In fact, the following day, she repeats this same sentiment, nearly verbatim.
Anything important that you recall during that conversation about the children, about his wife, about what he was doing the next day, what he had planned, anything like that? Did he tell you any of that information?
I remember he told me he had to go to the field and not to the office on Monday morning.
Okay. Did he specifically say where he needed to go on Monday morning?
No, I don't ask him for those sites. There's like, Anadarko's got like thousands of sites. If he were to tell me, I wouldn't even
They're
know.
just like random numbers and stuff, right?
Well, he told me, he said, I gotta go to a site. I gotta go check out like a valve or something where they think that they had a release. Something like that.
Did he mention the town or anywhere?
No.
I do want to know why we haven't got those interviews with the employees. Where are they at?
No, he just told me that that's what he had to go do. He's like, he was like, I won't see you in the office in the morning. Because I see him, but I don't actually like talk to him. Like I will go in the cafeteria, I will put my lunch in the fridge, and him and his whole team are sitting in there, and I don't talk to any of them. I just walk out. But anyways, yeah, he's like, so I won't see you, I'm going to the field, which is not an uncommon thing for the ops guys to like just go straight to the field. Like it happens. Like typically they go to the office, I would say like 3 or 4 days a week, but there are days where him and his other team members are not there. Or like I'll get in there and some days the cafeteria is packed and they're all there. Okay. And other days I get in there and there's only like 3 or 4 of them.
So it didn't cause you any concern that he said,
No.
I'm going to the field on Monday, I won't see you. That wasn't...
No.
That's happened before.
The words Nichol just spoke are not ambiguous statements. She is very clearly and in no uncertain terms stating that she was fine with Chris on Sunday night. She's explaining that his comments about going to the field first thing Monday morning were normal and in no way caused her any alarm. But as usual, less than a week later, she radically alters the entirety of her prior statements and manufactures one of the most ostentatious and grandiose fabrications I have heard in the entirety of my career. Nichol Kessinger comes up with this fantastical excuse for why she did actually have a problem with Chris and why she eventually confronted him about this never-before-mentioned problem. A problem that she has already vehemently denied having with him on 2 separate occasions in her statements to law enforcement, but now is telling a story where she is demanding proof from Chris Watts that he was at Survey 319, evidence that she demanded via text by telling him to prove it. To prove where he was in the form of a picture of the well site, the same well site where he had just disposed of his entire family. Proof that she had never once mentioned to law enforcement previously, material evidence on her cell phone in connection to a quadruple homicide that she now expects law enforcement to believe was completely innocent, despite not providing any reason for why her story has completely changed. And despite this shocking revelation, this earth-shattering news that law enforcement's own protected witness has just given them, implicating herself in asking their main suspect for proof of the crime scene where he disposed of his entire family, a picture that places the primary suspect at the crime scene containing all of the evidence he is attempting to hide. We in fact learned that at no point in the entirety of the discovery file was there any follow-up, any questions, any inquiries, anything whatsoever that could even begin to approach due diligence on the part of law enforcement. But as usual, Nichol Kessinger's lies were far from over.
Action speaks louder. Man, this guy's good.
Sometime in June, probably early June. It might have been May. It was just talking at work. It was pretty casual. And he didn't have a wedding ring on his finger. And every time I talked to him, he didn't tell me that he was in a relationship. He didn't even mention his kids right away either.
Did he mention the children's name or his significant other's name?
I didn't know his significant other's name for a while.
One of the most common misconceptions that people have about this case is concerning Nichol Kessinger's Google searches. Because of bad reporting and outright misinformation, many people incorrectly believe that Nichol's Google searches for Chris and Shanann Watts were not conducted in 2017, but in 2018 because of this news article. However, the Weld County District Attorney Michael Rourke confirmed himself that Nichol did in fact search for Chris and Shanann several months before she ever worked at Anadarko, over half a year before she claims she ever met Chris Watts. So her claim that she didn't know Shanann's name is a complete and utter fabrication, and once again a lie that was never followed up by any member of law enforcement throughout the entirety of this investigation, as confirmed by DA Michael Rourke. But easily one of the most disconcerting lies that Nichol Kessinger ever spoke is one that speaks to her character most of all.
Demanding the victim, or demeaning
She ever
the
came up
victim.
in conversation, he was very, civil about her. He never had anything, negative or derogatory to say about her.
And to be honest with you, there were several discussions that we had about his current relationship and where it had gone and what it had caused. And he talked about his kids from time to time, but the thing is he was never hostile. It was never anything aggressive. Even when he spoke of his wife and the fact that they were separating, it was never ill. It was still very kind. It was just this is not working, and would explain why, but it wasn't anything out of the ordinary or anything that I think would scare me. And to this day, even after everything that I found out, I still look back at that and I don't see any red lights with the way that he spoke of his family.
In the early days of this investigation, Nichol was careful to avoid saying anything overtly negative about Shanann, even claiming that Chris never said anything negative or damaging about Shanann either. But within a few short weeks, Kessinger completely changes that narrative again and pivots to outright slandering Shanann's character and her memory. But everything you just heard, taken directly from law enforcement's interviews and evidence, doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the number of problems that exist with Nichol's statements to police, or the problematic issues that exist with her possible connections to these crimes. From Nichol's cell phone pinging in Frederick near the home of Chris Watts.
Which, I do apologize for stopping, but I want to put this out there. There was a TikToker, I'm not going to mention names, that mentioned that she was on her way to work. Do you realize how many different ways that she could have gone that would have not pinged in Frederick, Colorado? I looked, there's 5 or different directions that she could have drove that did not ping in Frederick, Colorado. But why did, for all the times that she's gone to work, did her phone not ping Frederick, Colorado since April of her working there? But the one day where it was the murder, or morning of the murder, her phone actually pings in Frederick, Colorado. I call BS. Just saying. For those people that are defending Nichol Kessinger.
6:16 a.m. the morning of August 13th, placing her in the correct time and proximity of when and where Chris committed his crimes, including her vehicle being seen by witnesses in the neighborhood.
Anything
Neighbors.
different over the last, I don't know,
Betty.
2 days, 3 days? Odd vehicles, odd noises, odd lights?
There was a truck out here yesterday. In fact, that's why I thought you were here yesterday. Maybe someone complained about that I hadn't seen off.
And this truck was actually outside, I do believe, her mother's house, which was a shock and an awe because Dwayne Kessinger was actually with somebody else as a stepmother.
Before.
What type of truck?
It was kind of almost a steel gray. Okay. Don't ask me to make.
Okay.
Year.
The footage that many believe shows her silhouette while Chris was preparing to dispose of his family, her cell phone records, her elusive friend Jim, her failure to account for her whereabouts the morning and afternoon of the crimes, her suspicious phone calls, and her connection to the oxycodone that Chris used to try and force Shanann's miscarriage. The list goes on and on. Since posting the first video covering Nichol Kessinger in August of this year, over 2.5 million people have viewed and commented on this series. And when I started this final episode, I believed that I needed to do more to show the definitive evidence proving Nichole's culpability, demonstrating the breadth of the lies that she told. I placed on my shoulders the responsibility of answering a question that literally thousands of you have asked.
I agree.
If there were this many inconsistencies with Nichole's statements to law enforcement, then why didn't they properly and thoroughly investigate her possible involvement? After weeks and months of going down every imaginable rabbit hole in this case, I stumbled onto something that I believe is the answer to that question. And what I'm about to show you will explain why the only way you can properly understand how Nichol Kessinger was allowed to brazenly lie to law enforcement without any repercussions, you must first understand the history of the one and only person responsible for making that decision. Because the reality is, there is only one singular reason why all of this information has been summarily ignored, rejected, and labeled as nothing more than a witch hunt. And if you truly want to know the reason why, then you first have to understand a different case entirely.
People versus Chad. This is
on the morning of
man.
October 19th, 1995, Tina Tournay Sandoval left her shift at Colorado Medical Center, where she worked as a well-respected registered nurse. She was loved by her peers and was viewed as a consummate professional by everyone who knew and loved her, from her colleagues, her patients, and most importantly, her family. At that point in her life, Tina was in the final steps of finishing a contentious divorce, and earlier that day, her soon-to-be ex-husband, John Sandoval, had asked her to come over to his house to discuss some tax issues related to their divorce proceeding. In the years prior to their divorce, Tina's husband had been implicated in a number of crimes throughout the greater Denver area. John Sandoval was well known to local law enforcement, and it's been said that any time a crime was reported related to the harassment or stalking of women, Sandoval's name was attached to the list of likely suspects. Shortly after leaving work, Tina called her sister Susan and told her of her reluctant plan to meet with Sandoval late that same morning. Tina explained that she would call her sister later that afternoon to confirm that she was okay after her meeting with her soon-to-be ex-husband. Susan agreed and nervously watched the clock, attentively waiting for Tina's call. Hours passed, but the call never came, and to make matters worse, Tina had previously told her family that if anything ever happened to her, to tell law enforcement to look at her husband, John Sandoval, because he had threatened her life on numerous prior occasions. Her family immediately began calling Sandoval, demanding to know where Tina was, but to no avail. He claimed to not have seen her since that morning. Right away, Tina's family contacted the Greeley Police Department, who sprang into action. Within hours, they located Tina's car, parked just 4 blocks away from Sandoval's home. Wasting no time, they brought in cadaver dogs, which would confirm their worst fears. The dogs hit on the driver's side of Tina's car, and almost immediately they found a trail, a scent trail that led directly back to the home of John Sandoval. By the time law enforcement arrived at Sandoval's house, he was nowhere to be found. He had completely disappeared, so that evening, law enforcement began a surveillance operation at his home, eagerly waiting for his return. At the time, they didn't have sufficient probable cause to enter his home, so they needed to catch him with some kind of tangible evidence that could prove whatever he had done with Tina. 5 hours later, John Sandoval came home. Law enforcement would eventually get the green light, and they secured his arrest for an unrelated outstanding warrant. After his arrest, they conducted a search of his vehicle, and inside of it they would find a shovel covered in sand and mud, a bucket, a plastic bag, a level, a flashlight, and a handgun. But despite the enormity of the circumstantial evidence that law enforcement had gathered against Sandoval, they were faced with a seemingly impossible uphill battle against a seasoned and weathered criminal who understood the justice system all too well. Law enforcement was lacking a crime scene, any forensic evidence, a weapon linked to the crime, a confession, but most importantly, the whereabouts or the remains of Tina Tournay. Despite what appeared to be a strong circumstantial case, the reality was that without more evidence, this case would change to a new status within the homicide unit, one that would shatter the heart of Tina's entire family while denying them the justice they so clearly deserved. But even though Tina Tournay's file was now considered a cold case, this story was far from over. Detective Michael Prill of the Greeley Police Department had been assigned to work the Tina Tournay case and was particularly affected by the outcome when it went cold. Unwilling to allow the case to languish any further, he took it upon himself to seek justice on behalf of the Tournay family. A decade after Tina's disappearance, Detective Prill made the choice to focus his attention on John Sandoval, a man who had successfully evaded any form of accountability from the justice system. And Detective Prill was in luck, because one of his closest friends and colleagues happened to be in a position to make the call to prosecute Sandoval, and that friend was the Honorable District Attorney, Michael J. Rourke. Prill and Rourke had been close friends for many years, but this was about justice and going after a man who had evaded it for far too long. So Prill brought the case file to Rourke and presented the body of the circumstantial evidence they had in support of Sandoval's criminality, connecting him to Tina's disappearance. And by the time Detective Prill was done pleading his case, DA Rourke made the decision to prosecute John Sandoval for the premeditated homicide of Tina Tournay Sandoval. But this would be one of the only times in the history of the criminal justice system that a case was being brought forward with no confession, no weapon, no crime scene, no forensic evidence, and no remains. While the circumstantial evidence was strong, the prosecution was faced with the daunting task of trying to convict a man with no direct evidence tying him to the crime, let alone proof that a crime had even taken place. Securing a conviction would have to be a delicate balance between following the rules that govern the entirety of our judicial process and ensuring that Sandoval was prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And whether DA Rourke liked it or not, he would have to closely follow the rules that protected even the likes of a monster like John Sandoval. A line can be drawn from the travesty of justice that was the homicide of Tina Tournay and the eventual outcome of the Chris Watts case. And what I'm about to show you directly impacts the reason that I believe that Nichol Kessinger was allowed to make a mockery of the entire justice system and everything that it supposedly stands for.
Hopefully I don't get pissed.
On April 12th of this year, a fairly new true crime podcast released its 11th episode entitled Prosecutorial Vicarious Trauma. And the special guest for that episode would be the Honorable Michael J. Rourke, the Weld County District Attorney and prosecutor for the Chris Watts case. In that episode, we learned that one of the co-hosts, Kimberly Corbin, is actually the wife of DA Michael Rourke. But it's what they discuss in this episode that is nothing short of unbelievable.
Yeah, I found out the hard way. Bella and Celeste were, like I said, 3 and 4-year-old little girls with very long, glowing blonde hair who liked to run around the living room, dance, sing, and do cartwheels. We knew that because we had some social media posts that Shanann had put on her Facebook page or Instagram, one of them. And so I watched those.
At the beginning of the episode, we are given a summary of DA Rourke's professional work history and what led to his eventual appointment as the DA by the governor of Colorado. After conducting research into his campaign records, I was able to learn that DA Rourke has run unopposed in his position as the Weld County DA for the last 2 election cycles, in 2016 and in 2020,
which 2024 he's running again.
Respectively. In fact, he only needed to raise $7,780 to secure his successful bids as the elected politically conservative DA in the conservative district of Weld County. And to be clear, I'm not making a disparaging political statement, but a factual one. However, DA Rourke doesn't shy away from his very openly political views, both present day and in the past.
Mr. Wren and I flew out to North Carolina about 3 weeks ago and spent quite a bit of time with the Rourke family talking about the state of the death penalty in Colorado, the realities of the death penalty. We explained to them the extraordinary delays that currently exist in the state of Colorado as the result of, in part, the actions of our current governor.
Of course, left a vacancy in the district attorney's office since he was midterm, and I had to go through the formal process of trying to have the governor of Colorado appoint me, which was touch and go, a little bit nerve-wracking because he is of a very different political party and very different political view from me and most of Weld County.
But it's in this episode that we hear from DA Rourke concerning 2 specific cases that he describes as having caused him and his staff vicarious trauma. And the very first case he chooses to discuss is the homicide of Tina Tournay, a case where DA Rourke reveals far more than I imagine he ever intended, and how important a role that case was about to play in a crime that had yet to be committed. District Attorney Michael Rourke begins to describe what started his involvement with the Sandoval case, giving us important insights into the perspective, mindset, and motivations of a prosecutor.
In about 2009, I got a call from Detective Mike Prill from the Greeley Police Department, who's one of my very good friends and the best investigator on the planet. And he used the name John Sandoval for the first time, and he said, "Are you aware that our department has been looking at the Sandoval case again, and we want you to take a look at it?" And I didn't really know what he was talking about. Despite what Kim had just said, in the 5 years that I had been in the office, I hadn't really heard about this case.
Until this moment, I wasn't previously aware of the close relationship between Detective Michael Prill and District Attorney Rourke.
Nor have I.
In fact, during my research, I noticed in his campaign contributions that his friend Michael Prill helped financially support his efforts to maintain his role as the county DA. But later in this episode, DA Rourke begins to discuss in more detail when Detective Prill met with him concerning the prosecution of John Sandoval.
Again, fast forward to 2009, they present this case to us and say, look, this case needs to be prosecuted. We know he did it. We don't have a crime scene. We don't know a murder weapon. We don't know how she's killed, but we know she's dead. There's been no contact with her for 14 years. Mm-hmm. And so after that presentation, my trial partner and I, Matt Malaro, spent a lot of time talking about it, and we decided to try it, to make an effort to prosecute that case. We both left that presentation without a doubt in our minds as prosecutors that he's the one that's responsible for this.
DA Rourke provides an incredible amount of information about the history of this case, specifically what the Greeley Police Department knew about the potential location of where John Sandoval had disposed of Tina's remains. Information that we learn that law enforcement knew in the mid-1990s. And you are going to want to pay very close attention to what you're about to hear. because these details are about to become paramount in the eventual outcome of a case that has a shocking and unexpected ending.
So let me put what I'm about to describe in context. As part of our investigation leading up to trial, we knew that law enforcement, the Greeley Police Department, had looked at the possibility that Sandoval may have secreted her remains in a local cemetery.
The Greeley Police Department already had a very specific suspicion of where Sandoval likely hid the remains of Tina during those 5 hours that he was unaccounted for. But law enforcement wasn't just shooting in the dark, because what they knew over a decade before John Sandoval was charged with first-degree homicide is information that was far more specific than anyone could have even begun to imagine.
As part of our investigation leading up to trial, this was back in maybe the early 2000s with the advent of a local group called NecroSearch, who's responsible for, or who are a group of volunteers of all different specialties who go out and try to find clandestine grave sites. They volunteer their time, they volunteer their equipment, they come in and testify when necessary, but they had looked at the possibility that Sandoval had buried or hid Tina's remains in a local cemetery. They went so far as to know through their investigation that the night Tina disappeared, there were 3 open graves that had been dug for funerals in the day or two.
So you're telling me this guy in the past took the ashes or disposed of Tina in a different grave?
After her disappearance. We also knew from that investigation that if there was a morning burial, so we're talking about the morning of October 20th of 1995, the afternoon and evening of the 19th, the grave would have been dug and they would have put at the bottom of that grave a concrete pad that ultimately the casket would be lowered onto, a concrete vault would be put over the top of, and then the burial would occur. If it was an afternoon burial, they wouldn't put that concrete pad into the bottom of the grave until the morning of the service, the burial. They looked into that possibility. They investigated it to the extent they could. And so we knew what 3 graves were open.
So let's review. Law enforcement already suspected that John Sandoval hid his wife's remains in just one of the 3 grave sites that he had access to on the night that he was missing for 5 hours. Additionally, law enforcement had access to this company, NecroSearch, who, as we heard, will not only donate their time, but also their equipment for free in an effort to assist law enforcement in retrieving the remains of a missing person.
So why not use it?
So my next logical question was, what exactly did NecroSearch find when they were brought in to search the 3 grave sites? Well, DA Rourke is about to tell us.
We had taken one last swing, for lack of a better word, at the command staff at Greeley PD when we were getting ready for trial and said, can we have NecroSearch go out and do ground penetrating radar to see if we can find something underneath one of those graves? And I remember the investigations lieutenant looking at me and said, you all committed to trying this case as a no-body homicide. I don't have the manpower or the resources, financial resources, to do that at this point, so we're not going to do it. So we didn't do it.
So District Attorney Michael Rourke has just told us that he waited just before the trial of John Sandoval to ask the Greeley Police Lieutenant for permission to use NecroSearch and their ground-penetrating radar to look under the concrete pad of the 3 possible locations where Tina's remains could be. And the response was that it wasn't in the budget? Now, I will admit I am not.
Screw your frickin' budget. It's about finding a woman's killer. Do it for free.
A law enforcement professional, nor have I ever been, but I'm confused. What budget exactly? Didn't we just hear that NecroSearch donates their time and equipment for free? Well, maybe I'm being too harsh, and maybe I just don't understand law enforcement's methods or tactics, and it won't ultimately matter once they go to trial. And sure enough, in 2010, after a month-long jury trial with 137 witnesses testifying, the jury would deliberate for just 7 hours before returning a verdict against the defendant, John Sandoval, finding him guilty as charged in the indictment. And their sentence? Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Game over, right? Justice served. The DA's conviction percentage is maintained, and everyone can rest easy at night
No.
knowing that this monster John Sandoval is off the streets and is safely locked away in prison for the rest of his life. I mean, sure, it's a tragedy that they were unable to recover Tina's remains, but in our society, we are taught that this is justice enough, that sometimes this is the best we can hope for, and that this is where justice and the case ultimately ends.
Because it's not in the budget.
If only that were true. Because just 6 years later, the Colorado Court of Appeals reviewed the appellate filing of John Sandoval. In March of 2016, they handed down a 55-page opinion that would alter the course of justice in this case's history forever. And I urge you to pay very close attention to the words that DA Rourke is about to use, because they are about to matter more than you could possibly realize.
Fast forward to March of 2015. I'm now the elected DA for 2 months, and we knew that the case was working its way through the appellate courts in Colorado. I said 15, didn't I? 16. Yep. Excuse me, March of 16. So I had been a DA for a year and 3 months. We had worked with the Colorado Attorney General's office to try to maximize what we thought was our potential of getting that conviction affirmed on appeal. And in March of 16, the Court of Appeals reversed his conviction, finding that there were several errors that occurred during his trial, which required him to have a new trial.
And they found that there were several errors? Now that sounds perfectly benign and rather unspecific, lacking any detail or specificity whatsoever. Because if you spent any amount of time watching this channel, you already know that I had to find out exactly what the appellate court's opinion actually said. I had to know what procedural reasons 3 appeals court judges could possibly have to remand a conviction and force a new jury trial, especially based on nothing more than several errors. In the United States of America, a vast majority of appeals filed within the criminal justice system are largely unsuccessful, and the number of cases that are reversed and remanded back to the lower court for a retrial are smaller still. So it seems rather odd to me that the Honorable District Attorney Michael J. Rourke would characterize the appeals court ruling as being based on nothing more than procedure and error. So I started to search to see if I could find the appellate court's opinion anywhere, and I was unpleasantly surprised at the sheer lack of coverage about a ruling so considerable. So I contacted the Colorado Court of Appeals and obtained a copy of their opinion, and what I found on the pages of that ruling flies in the face of a descriptor so asinine and insignificant as mere errors. Because what I read on those pages proved to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that our justice system and those who are given the power to enforce it, they are in dire need of change. Who is responsible for making the decision to charge someone with a crime? Over the years, I've heard a multitude of answers from people. From the arresting officer, maybe the senior officer in command at the scene, or even the chief of police. I've heard some people say that it's a random person in the prosecutor's office, with some people still believing that the victim themselves is ultimately who decides whether or not charges are brought forward against an offender. But none of those answers are correct. Here's the stark reality of the criminal justice system within the United States of America. With very few exceptions, there is just one single person who makes the decision to file charges against an offender for a criminal action. And for a vast majority of us, that person is the district attorney. On July 20th, 2020, 18-year-old Grant Solomon was struck by his own vehicle in what was initially believed to be a tragic accident in the parking lot of a baseball training club in Gallatin, Tennessee. However, in the weeks that followed, a considerable amount of evidence arose, calling into question the nature of his death and putting an air of suspicion on the last and only person who was with Grant at the time of his supposed accident. Grant was the son of Aaron Solomon, a local celebrity who had worked as a radio and television personality, a man with very strong ties to key members of law enforcement, the media, local politicians, and other powerful officials who all just happened to be close-knit members of the same church. To make matters worse, it was revealed that Grant's sister Gracie had previously come forward with credible accusations against her father Aaron that implicated him in crimes against her that had the potential to land him in prison for years. Since Grant's death, the public has learned that Gracie had previously informed her older brother of the abuse. A brother who was fiercely protective of Gracie, and when he learned of the abuse that she had endured at the hands of their father, a short time later, Grant was dead. Despite a litany of information that has come out since Grant's untimely death, local law enforcement has refused to investigate the credible information that they have received against this pillar of their community. And despite a considerable amount of pressure from people wanting justice, the district attorney has outright declined any official investigation into Grant Solomon's death. In the United States, the choice to proceed with the criminal action is often decided by just one person. Someone who is just like you and me, with opinions, biases, viewpoints, and political inclinations that impact who they prosecute, and ultimately, who they do not. Which is precisely why each of us have witnessed cases where a criminal action is never pursued, even when compelling evidence exists that a crime was committed. We are all told that power wielded by a district attorney when executed for the right reasons is the highest form of justice that we could ever hope for, resulting more often than not in a just outcome. But you don't have to look far to see an inordinate number of examples where that power is misused, resulting in disastrous outcomes. And there is almost no better example that I can give you than the case of John Sandoval. In March of 2016, the appellate court issued their ruling concerning Sandoval's appeal, remanding the case back to the lower court for a retrial. And the legal basis for why the appellate court granted his appeal is vitally important to understand. In the U.S. and in most first world countries, our judicial system is not decided on the weight of societal morality, but rather on the laws and rules created to protect those values. The rules and laws that exist within that system govern everyone, not just criminals, but law enforcement, attorneys, and even prosecutors. So even when we truly believe that someone is guilty on the basis of compelling circumstantial evidence, the law demands that we follow the rules and guidelines set forth throughout each and every state, county, and province. These rules and guidelines are a mechanism that protects each of us from unfair prosecution, wrongful convictions, and most importantly, ensuring that justice is just. So I was quite surprised to learn that the appeals court did not merely remand John Sandoval's case back to the lower court for a retrial due to some implied minor procedural errors, but in fact, they found that DA Michael Rourke had made inexcusable mistakes during the trial. Mistakes that included introducing evidence by an expert witness that he knew or should have known was completely and totally impermissible. And their findings of his mistakes were not solely from the testimony of this expert, but the court also found that DA Rourke made inexcusable mistakes during his opening and closing statements. Allow me to read just one small segment from the court's ruling. During closing arguments, the prosecution urged the jury to use the mathematical probability evidence as proof Sandoval murdered Tina Tournay. DA Rourke stated the following to the jury, quote, "In 75% of intimate partner homicides, there has been previous stalking behavior. That's what the literature on domestic violence tells, and that's what the evidence in this case should tell you. Ladies and gentlemen, when you review all of the evidence, one thing should be very clear. Tina is deceased. She is no longer alive. She has not been since October 19th of 1995, unquote. The proceeding is the appellate court's outlining for the legal basis of why D.A. Rourke erred during the trial of John Sandoval. And as we just heard, he effectively told the jury that because John Sandoval had previously stalked his wife, that there was a 75% statistical likelihood that he also committed her homicide. This is completely impermissible in a court of law by a prosecutor, and tragically for the Tournay family. D.A. Rourke either knew or should have known that the appeals court would consider this a violation outside of the bounds of what they would allow from any prosecutor representing the state. And you tell me if what the appeals court judges are about to say sounds like insignificant procedural errors to you. Quote, "The impact of the inadmissible expert offender behavior and statistical correlation evidence cannot be overstated, particularly when combined with both the numerous witnesses testifying to Sandoval's prior stalking behavior and the prosecution's closing argument." As noted, the prosecution highlighted the expert's testimony and linked it to the prior bad acts to suggest Sandoval's guilt based on a mathematical probability. This invited the jury to consider that because there was a statistical connection between individuals who are stalkers and individuals who commit homicides, that there was a high mathematical probability that Sandoval was guilty of murder and a low probability that he was not guilty because of his past behavior. Unquote. One of the many things I have learned in my years of working with and around experienced litigators who routinely try cases in front of judges and juries is the deep and well-versed knowledge that they have of the law. D.A. Michael Rourke knew exactly what the law stated. He knew exactly what he was allowed to do and what he was not allowed to do. He has been a supervisor of other prosecutors for over 2 decades, teaching and managing what those assistant DAs do within their own docket of cases. I truly believe that he knew that he wasn't allowed to present this kind of evidence, but that he seemingly believed that the guilt of John Sandoval somehow outweighed his need to operate within the guidelines of the justice system. This case lacked any of the hallmarks of evidence that prosecutors typically have, and instead of relying on the jury to make the just and right decision, he overstepped the rules that govern all lawyers. And I suspect that there is a very specific reason why he chose to overstep the line in the Sandoval case.
So what I heard you say is that you really became emotionally and personally involved in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when I worked in law enforcement, one of the things that we very often are told is that you can't get emotionally involved in these cases, because honestly, if you do, it just drags you down and you wouldn't make it. But what I have experienced and what I have heard that it seems like you have experienced is the cases in which you tend to inadvertently get the most emotionally involved in, they become personal. They also open you up to the most trauma.
Sure.
Yeah.
D.A. Michael Rourke is a human being, and for the record, I don't believe that he is a bad person. I believe he is like each and every one of us, fallible and capable of making mistakes. But as we just heard, he admits that he gets deeply emotionally involved in the cases that he prosecutes. And in that same segment, we hear him being reminded that as a representative of law enforcement, one of the first things they learn is to not become emotionally attached to the outcome of a case. Precisely because those emotions can blind you from doing your job. Closely attached to our emotions is our ego. And sometimes one of the hardest things we can do as human beings is admitting when we're wrong. And I believe that's precisely what went wrong with D.A. Rourke's handling of Nichol Kessinger. That he became so emotionally attached to ensuring that Chris Watts was convicted that that singular outcome was the only thing he saw. And it's ultimately why he and his colleagues missed the overwhelming signs that their own witness was lying and repeatedly demonstrating that she had something to hide.
So you're telling me, yes, humans have faults. I have faults. But I can guarantee you that I'm going to call myself on them and say, yeah, I effed up. I messed up. I need to fix this. Let's figure this out and let's fix it. Why are we not fixing this? If he was apparently so emotionally involved in getting Chris taken out and locked up, which thank God, why is she not looked at? Let's continue more of this.
But the mistakes that DA Rourke made during the first trial of John Sandoval would only pale in comparison to the unmitigated catastrophe that was about to happen next.
A deal with the devil.
Sandoval was a prolific jail call maker. He was on phones all the time. And so one of the first things we did, knowing that we were going to have to retry this case, was I had Detective Prill go to the Colorado Department of Corrections and get downloads of every phone call he had made while he was in prison. And we walked into our trial courtroom in early 16, and the judge said, when can you all be ready for trial again? And this was kind of calculated on our part. We made the record in front of the judge that, we're getting additional evidence. The defense is going to have to review it, but we have gotten every jail call he's made in the past 6 years that we're going to be reviewing, and the defense is going to need to review as well.
Prior to my investigation of the Watts case, I had no previous knowledge about the John Sandoval trial. So by this point of listening to the podcast, I was deeply invested in the outcome of his second trial. I was hopeful that despite the mistakes that the DA made in the first trial, that he would right the ship and use his leverage that he had just generated by informing the defendant that he was about to go through all 6 years of his prior phone calls. DA Rourke had started the beginning of this new trial wisely, making a calculated decision that could result in obtaining evidence of Sandoval admitting to the crime during his incarceration. It was a strong opening chess move, and frankly, I was impressed. But I couldn't help but wonder, now that the case was remanded back to the lower court for a new jury trial, and he was the DA, why wouldn't he have used that opportunity to utilize the knowledge they already had about Tina's likely clandestine burial site? Why not use the ground-penetrating radar on any one of the 3 grave sites that they already believed she was in and bring Tina home? Well, I was about to have that question answered in spades.
This was kind of calculated on our part. We made the record in front of the judge that, we're getting additional evidence. The defense is going to have to review it, but we have gotten every jail call he's made in the past 6 years that we're going to be reviewing, and the defense is going to need to review as well. And so we set the case out for a status conference several months down the road. And the next day I got a phone call from Sandoval's attorney, and she said, I have information from my client that the Greeley Police Department and your office and the Tournay family is probably going to want to hear. And I said, is he finally going to tell us the location of her body? And she said, perhaps. So the next day, or maybe later that afternoon, the defense attorney came over to my office, and basically we worked out an agreement where I obviously had to talk to Tina's family, but if we could reach a resolution that would involve him pleading guilty to a certain number of years, he would reveal the location of Tina's body.
Now, you might be tempted to think that this is a victory. John Sandoval, a man who has already been convicted for the homicide of Tina Tournay, is offering the family closure by telling them where she is.
He's caring about
and in
himself.
exchange for this information that the family clearly wants, he leverages a plea deal that will give him a lesser charge. But there's just one little problem with this entire exchange. DA Rourke has John Sandoval backed into a corner and is one move away from checkmate. Let's think about this for a moment. The DA has told the defendant in open court that he's about to go through all of his phone records from the prior 6 years of his incarceration. And less than 24 hours later, John Sandoval's defense attorney calls, offering information concerning Tina's burial location.
The way that I'm thinking this is happening is Chris had convicted himself and stated, yep, I did it. I did all of it, because he found out that they were possibly going to question Nichol, and Chris decided, hey, nope, me, look at me, over here, it's me. And then Michael Rourke was like, yeah, let's look at him. Let's go take care of him. But we're not going to look at Nichol anymore. I have a feeling that's what's happening right now.
And in exchange for that information, he is strong-arming the DA into taking first-degree homicide off the table, which makes it completely obvious that those phone call recordings likely had him dead to rights and would have given the prosecution the evidence that they needed to secure a second and final conviction against John Sandoval, guaranteeing that he would never leave prison and that he could never harm anyone ever again.
Which Chris would have gotten.
Moreover, the DA already knows where John likely disposed of her remains, in a cemetery in only one of 3 possible grave sites. So why in the world would DA Rourke just give up and offer this scumbag a plea deal when he has these 2 clear avenues to ensure that Sandoval doesn't ever get out of prison? Well, I'll let him tell the story.
So imagine the phone call that I had to make to the Tournay family about what I just described to you. And within a day or two, mom, dad, 5 sisters were all in my office. Tina had 2 brothers who live on the East Coast. They were both on the phone. And there was not unanimity amongst that family about what to do. But I remember Tina's mom looking at me, leaning in towards me, and she said, I want you to do whatever it takes to get my daughter back. And it feels much like we had to make a deal with the devil, because we did. The agreement ultimately was he would plead guilty to second-degree murder, which is a lesser offense in Colorado, for, I think the agreement was 25 or 27 years in the Department of Corrections, but it mandated him telling us where Tina's body was found.
And it feels like we had to make a deal with the devil. What a truly horrific position to be forced into as a mother. Your daughter has been missing and assumed dead for decades, and all you want to do is bring her home. But instead of DA Rourke doing the right thing, it would seem that he was more concerned with saying that he got his conviction and saved the county the cost of another trial. Because the plea deal was accepted, and you are not going to believe what's about to happen next.
The agreement ultimately was he would plead guilty to second-degree murder, which is a lesser offense in Colorado, for, I think the agreement was 25 or 27 years in the Department of Corrections, but it mandated him telling us where Tina's body was found. This is the surreal part. He takes us, he's in the Will County Jail, he gets checked out by law enforcement and drives us directly to that cemetery that I was talking about earlier. And he wanders around in part of the cemetery for a bit to orient himself, and finally walks over and stands over the grave of a man who very clearly on his headstone was a World War II veteran. And he said, she's under that.
When I listened to this podcast for the first time, I genuinely could not believe that this case had not become national news. A district attorney moves forward with the prosecution on a case absent of critical evidence that he could have obtained through the donated resources of NecroSearch, but instead chooses to proceed to trial, running roughshod over the rules of ethics and criminal procedure, not to mention the myriad of laws that are in place to protect all defendants. And because of the mistakes that he made, he opened the door to the appellate court's ruling, allowing John Sandoval to win that appeal.
Are you kidding
Then,
me?
DA Rourke allows that same man to force a plea deal in exchange for information that law enforcement already knew. And here's the worst part of it all. Per trial testimony and sworn statements of direct witnesses, John Sandoval has an established and known history of obsessively stalking and harassing dozens of women. He has been implicated and accused of countless crimes against women, including his confession in open court that he committed the homicide of Tina Tournay. And because of the egregious mistakes that were made in this case, John Sandoval, the convicted murderer, will be leaving prison because of the plea deal offered to him by the Honorable District Attorney Michael J. Rourke. A plea deal that ensures that on October 16th of 2029, less than 6 years from now, John Sandoval will leave prison. Oh, and just wait till you hear how this story is about to end.
And finally walks over and stands over the grave of a man who very clearly on his headstone was a World War II veteran. And he said, she's under that. Obviously, we had done our homework leading up to that. That was one of the 3 graves that was open that night. That was the only grave that had an afternoon burial. So the concrete pad hadn't been put in the bottom of that gravesite yet. I gotta tell you, that was such an amazing son and daughter-in-law. Within an hour of our phone call, they said, we will do whatever we can do to help you. They were at I can't remember if it was the sheriff's office or the police department in Laramie, Wyoming, signing a consent to have their father, his grave, exhumed so we could get underneath that grave. That happened the next day. NecroSearch was out there, and about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
But you could have done this years before, but because it wasn't in the budget, when it was a free service, free equipment, and was not done, this man is getting out in 6 years now.
We found Tina's remains.
Yes, you heard that right. The whole time, law enforcement knew that Tina Tournay was likely buried beneath the very same grave she was found under. And the one and only reason that DA Rourke provides for why they didn't use the donated time and resources of NecroSearch was because of budgetary constraints. What was so incredibly shocking to me about listening to this podcast is the entire time that DA Rourke tells this story, you could very clearly hear that it never occurs to him that he did a single thing wrong. We never hear a candid moment where he admits to any personal or professional shortcomings related to his prosecution of John Sandoval. And I honestly and genuinely believe that he cannot even conceive that he could have done anything differently, which is precisely the problem and is the exact same mentality that seemed to permeate the Chris Watts case. It's the exact same attitude and egotistical response that he provided to anyone who has ever questioned his investigation of Nichol Kessinger, or the lack thereof, I should say. It's as though he genuinely believes that anyone who questions him is nothing more than an ignorant bystander advocating for a witch hunt. But in their podcast episode, after finishing his story about the Sandoval matter, they pause for a commercial break, and the podcast shifts to another infamous case that he handled right after the Sandoval case ended. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Please place your tray tables in the upright position and make sure to tighten your seatbelt.
I was going to make this a 2-part series, but I am so invested in this. We're going to make this the whole way through. I want to watch it. I can't wait till tomorrow.
We're about to go through some considerable turbulence.
We're not going to hold everyone accountable.
On November 7th, 2018, NBC published the following article regarding the national news that had broke concerning Chris Watts accepting a plea deal that would give him life in prison in exchange for avoiding death row. The article quotes District Attorney Michael Rourke concerning the decision to offer Chris a plea deal that would undeservedly spare his life. But it's what DA Rourke says in this article that will likely sound familiar to those who have already studied this case. Rourke said at a press conference that the plea deal was made with the support of Shanann's family, and after he explained what he called the extraordinary delays that currently exist in Colorado with regard to the death penalty, he stated,
and I hope I'm saying this accurately, I know they'll correct me if I am wrong, but they were very strongly in favor of a resolution in this case short of the death penalty.
Rourke was referring to his conversation with Shanann Watts' mother, Sandra Ruszczyk. He went on to say,
the steps in the process that I felt like were due diligence in order to come to this decision I don't think any elected district attorney ever wants to have to make a decision about whether or not to seek the death penalty as it relates to an individual. But when I have a family who has been so incredibly supportive and so incredibly firm in their belief that the death penalty not be sought, I don't know how I would have said to them, I'm going to do it anyway. Sandy said it very, very poignantly to me. She said, he made the choice to take those lives. I do not want to be in a position of making the choice to take his. And so that's about as firmly as she could have said it to me. And that was very compelling to all of us as we were talking about how to proceed on this case.
Since November 7th, 2018, that has been the story that we have always been told, that it was the parents of Shanann who quite literally saved Chris Watts' life, which is why what you are about to hear is so incredibly and extremely disturbing.
Steve Wren, my chief deputy, and I flew to North Carolina and went to Shanann's parents' house to sit down with them in their living room to talk to them about the process, what they wanted to see happen, the realities of death penalty litigation in Colorado. And that's just not something you can have a conversation over the phone about. Ultimately, the outcome of that was a split. I mean, one parent wanted the death penalty. The other, Shanann's father, wanted us to make sure that this defendant never saw the light of day. And ultimately, he did plead guilty to everything we charged him with in exchange for not seeking the death penalty.
District Attorney Michael Rourke has just completely altered the narrative that he's told for the last 5 years. And he did this just 8 months ago on his wife's true crime podcast. And now he's stating that Sandra Ruszczyk did want the death penalty and that he had to convince her that it would be a waste of time because of Colorado's governor being a...
Are you flippin' kidding me? Are you kidding me?
Democrat. Since posting this series in August of this year, I have received hundreds of comments from people telling me that my advocacy for justice in this case is wrong.
Exactly.
I have received hundreds of emails and comments from people chastising me for having talked about this case at all.
I agree with you 100%. I have literally dealt with the same thing. People chastising me, telling me to get over it. You're a loser. You have no reason to be in this. That you are wrong, you are stupid, you're an idiot. Like, it's gotten pretty bad for some of the messages that I've gotten. And I just felt so much in my heart and soul that I knew there was more to this case. And I understand this man 100%. And for this to start coming out that things were done wrong.
And yet here we have the DA who's responsible for the prosecution of this case literally changing the narrative that has always been that Sandra Ruszczyk was the one who effectively saved Chris Watts' life. Only to now tell the world that in fact, she was the one who wanted him on death row.
She wanted him gone.
And just in case you aren't sold that we have a problem in Weld County, Colorado, listen to how this DA describes his power as the sole shot caller for doling out justice in Weld County.
I know that we're contemplating seeking the death penalty, and as the elected DA, that's my decision. That's not anybody else's. I'm going through a process of talking to law enforcement, community leaders, my own commissioners for budget reasons, her family, like I talked about, senior leadership in my office, and my wife, because there's a recognition that this is the ultimate decision I have to make.
What does your wife have to do with this?
Wife helps you to make the decision for whether or not to pursue the death penalty? Is it starting to make sense why I believe there should be a vote of no confidence in Weld County for this DA? But before you answer that, listen to what DA Rourke says in response to his wife and her co-host asking him if he is in fact a fan of any specific true crime content.
Because this is Survivor's Guide to True Crime, we have to know. Do you listen to true crime podcasts?
I do not. I don't. In all seriousness, I don't. And Kim knows the answer to this. I don't come home and read true crime books. I don't come home and read fictional stories about crime or those kinds of things. But the other reason, I don't know from a prosecutor standpoint if the true crime story that's being put out has been authorized by the victim or if the victim has participated. And if it hasn't, I am not going to consume that out of respect for that victim and his or her choices. And yeah, I'm just not going to do it because I'm not going to allow someone to monetize a victim suffering for my own entertainment value.
So the Honorable District Attorney Michael Rourke doesn't even listen to content that is monetized or that is absent of the permission of the victims. And remember, he said that because it's about to become very relevant. Now let's listen to how he sets up his discussion about Chris Watts and what he specifically refuses to do related to that case.
So one case in particular, I know a lot of people are going to know. So I want you to talk about it because it's one of your most memorable cases.
Just don't make me say his name.
All right.
Because I refuse to do that. I refer to this now as the Frederick homicide case, triple homicide.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't think that it is necessary to say offenders' names.
What I find so incredibly amusing about this tirade is that this same elected official mere minutes before had no problem saying the name John Sandoval over and over and over again. But the second he starts talking about Chris Watts, he now refuses to use or say his name. In fact, both him and his wife proceed to lecture us about how we shouldn't use the name of the offenders from these cases at all. He goes on to say that he won't even listen to a video that is linked to a creator who hasn't received permission from the victim or anyone who has any form of monetization on their platform. Okay, so then I have a question. Did DA Michael Rourke get the permission of the Ruscheks and the Tournays to discuss their cases? Did he contact Sandra Ruschek and ask her if he had permission to change the narrative of the entire story that has ever been told prior to going on to his wife's true crime podcast? Because I very seriously doubt that she appreciates him changing the story in such a drastic way after half a decade of telling the world that she was the one to advocate for Chris to get the plea deal and for him not to go on to death row. And I couldn't help but notice that as he's pontificating about how he won't even listen to true crime content that is monetized, that he makes these same statements in the exact same episode that this occurs.
But did you know that it's also adaptogen April?
Say what?
Do you know what an adaptogen is, Kim?
I understand all of those words separately.
So adaptogens are essentially some type of compound, botanical, that goes into your body and helps your body deal with stress.
So let's be clear. It's completely okay for the DA and his wife to go onto a podcast where they read a paid advertisement while speaking about Chris Watts and changing the narrative about Shanann's mother, but when anyone else does it, that's unethical. Now, you may recall at the start of this episode, I told you that DA Michael Rourke has a message for each and every one of you. All of the concerned citizens who have pleaded with him and his office to open an investigation into Nichol Kessinger, to examine the mountain of evidence that they chose to ignore. Well, listen closely, because the next few minutes are his message to you.
The demand from the public, once his case was resolved, for open and complete access, either through Criminal Justice Records Act, FOIA requests, in Colorado it's called the Colorado Open Records Act, was crushing. I have an office of 80 employees, and I bet if we would have done this any other way, all 80 of my employees would have been responding to nothing but these requests. So we had to make the choice of making the files that we would release public available on our website, office website, through a program called ShareFile, where people could simply request it, they'd get the link, and they could download it, they could sit at home and read. The number of people that have done that is stunning. We are talking multiple tens of thousands of downloads worldwide of this horrific crime that I have described. I also have seen, from my perspective, the number of people who have wanted to play junior detective They want to play junior detective. They want to second guess charging decisions. They want to second guess whether or not the offender is truly guilty. They want to second guess the sentencing determination that I had to make. And in this one, in my description earlier, I didn't share this piece, but at the same time, we knew through the course of our investigation that the defendant was having an affair with somebody that he had met at work. And there was the significant belief by many that she played a role in this murder. The most recent email I have gotten demanding that I reopen the investigation and prosecute her for murder, I received last week. I bet conservatively we have gotten 5,000 or 6,000 emails demanding the same thing, questioning the very decision-making process that we had gone through without having all the information. We get phone calls from people who say, I want you to justify or articulate why you made this decision. And I'm not going to do that. I just refuse. It's gotten to the point where about 2 years ago, I finally decided I'm not doing any more interviews. I'm not doing any more documentaries. I'm not doing any made-for-TV movies, nothing. I have got to get out of talking about this particular case.
You can so clearly hear his disdain for all of the people who have ever taken interest in this case, his constituents. You know, the people that live and work and operate in his county, the people who just want justice, not for their own self-promotion or vain ambition, but because it's just the right thing to do. Because so many of us believe that justice truly matters. And when you have that much evidence that this witness should have been investigated properly as a potential suspect or as a person of interest, it goes beyond ego. And it strikes at the very heart of why we advocate for justice, which is exactly the purpose of a district attorney. But after thousands of people have contacted his office, countless emails of people practically begging him to finish what he started, the Honorable District Attorney Michael J. Rourke has a very clear answer to every person still advocating for Shanann, for Bella, for Cece, and for Nico.
And so, for clarity, that avenue has been investigated. It is closed. Period. That's it.
Period.
So stop asking about it.
Stop asking about it. She didn't have anything to do with it. She wasn't there that morning. She voluntarily cooperated with law enforcement. She provided us all the information. I'm not going to tell you where she's at. Stop. Leave me alone.
So leave her the hell alone. I mean, leave y'all alone about it. Leave her alone. Absolutely
But
not.
she didn't do it. She had nothing to do with it. Leave her alone.
And this is just one of the many reasons I left my legal career behind. While I had the pleasure of working with some truly exceptional people over the years, far too often I had the displeasure of working with people just like DA Michael Rourke. People who believed that their high conviction rate, their accolades, and their achievements make their view of the law and of the world around them immune to criticism. Some of the most egotistical and arrogant people I have ever met in the entirety of my life occupy places of power exactly like this. People who genuinely believe that they are so far above scrutiny that their ego doesn't even allow them to consider that anything they do, have done, or will ever do is deserving of anything less than praise and admiration. Because the sheer volume of people who have expressed interest in this case, that's not an indicator to them that maybe something could have been done better or more thoroughly, but rather that every person interested in the pursuit of justice is nothing more than a nuisance. But DA Rourke wasn't even close being done addressing each of you yet. Here's his take on what you can expect from him concerning the justice system.
And so what I would say is rely on the criminal justice system to do the things that we are vested with doing, which is trying to hold accountable the offenders who commit these crimes. We're not going to hold everybody accountable. We're going to miss some sometimes.
Yeah.
But you're right. Don't look to us to solve every problem. You're right. I can't, and we can't, as law enforcement, solve all of the world's problems.
That is your job. You signed, or you put your hand on an oath to obtain and defend the country. against people that do wrong. When I served the military, did I say I was going to do it sometimes? Did I say I was going to not do it when I felt like it? This is upsetting. Oh, it's going to happen. You don't want to hear that from somebody like this. You want to hear that they are determined and bound to do everything physical possible to make sure that those families get the justice that they deserve. And he's like, oh, it's going to happen sometimes. We might miss it here and there. Oh, well, who cares? That makes no sense.
Problems and try to put victims back in the position prior to their victimization, because that's just impossible.
We're not going to hold everybody accountable are the words that are spoken by a man who made a deal with the devil, ensuring that John Sandoval will leave prison in less than 6 years.
And could
Oh, and he has one last thing to tell you before he's done.
What I really want to say, I mean, let's be honest. What I really want to say is quit being jerks. Quit trying to think that you on your couch behind an anonymous keyboard knows better than those of us who are professionals in the field, who are always going to ascribe to us a motive to do something that is unethical, immoral, or illegal. Quit trying to think that you know better than we do because you have some preconceived notion about law enforcement or prosecutors.
One of the most tragic elements of this entire diatribe is the fact that I don't think he understands that the concern shown by so many people about the Watts case is not out of trying to tell law enforcement what to do. We simply see that there was more that could have been done, and discounting the authenticity of our advocacy only emboldens that viewpoint. No matter how much he may want this, you cannot wish this case away. You cannot instruct people to stop caring about Shanann and her children. However, I do want to be clear. I actually agree with DA Rourke that the people who attack the victims in this case are subhuman, and they do not deserve any attention, views, or a following. No one has the right to attack or demean the memory of Shanann, and I do not care what your reasoning is. She did not deserve the horrific nightmare that was brought upon her by her cheating coward of a husband. But you cannot expect the public to hear the multitude of lies pouring out of the mouth of Nichol Kessinger and simultaneously expect those same people to ignore it by saying that you've done your job. That is not only unreasonable, but it's a literal recipe for guaranteeing the overwhelming interest in this case, especially in light of the fact that law enforcement's own evidence definitively shows that they did not complete their own investigation. And by virtue of that fact, it will only force this case to remain at the forefront of those advocating for justice, if needed, for decades to come. Because the unfortunate reality is, the professionals in the...
I'm sorry, guys. I don't mean to cry this much.
Specifically, District Attorney Michael Rourke, someone who claims to know better, he failed Tina Tournay and her entire family. And many of us now see that same pattern that has allowed for John Sandoval to walk free, being seen throughout the entirety of the Nichol Kessinger interviews and throughout her interactions with law enforcement. And it's because of that stark reality that we now understand that no amount of time will ever deter our advocacy for justice, which is why there is only one thing left to do.
Quit trying to think that you on your couch behind an anonymous keyboard knows better than those of us who are professionals in the field. Quit trying to think that you know better than we do.
These words from D.A. Rourke have stayed with me since I first listened to his appearance on his wife's podcast, and it made me realize something deeply important. When just one person holds the power to decide whether or not a case moves forward, it's a recipe for disaster. And this sentiment he just shared can be seen throughout countless examples of men and women who have pleaded with law enforcement for justice, but to no avail. Arguably, one of the most important roles that law enforcement plays within our communities is their solemn duty to protect and serve. And there is no one more deserving of that protection than our children. Over the last several years, a multitude of investigative journalists have sprung up all over YouTube, posting their videos exposing predators from all across the United States. These men and women revive a style of journalism not seen since the days of Chris Hansen's To Catch a Predator. In an effort to protect our communities and our children, these independent journalists pose as underage minors and catch would-be predators in the act of attempting to steal the innocence of our children. These organizations catch each offender on camera in an effort to expose them and ultimately to protect the community from their penchant to commit unspeakable acts against kids. But even when these organizations follow the guidelines provided to them by local law enforcement and DAs, far too often they are met with this response.
Are you Jenny's uncle?
Am I Jenny's uncle?
Are you Jenny's uncle, like you said?
Well, we're just more curious about what. We're just curious why he's buying child of 2-year-olds.
That's not what he said.
Oh, okay.
I said, are you Jenny's uncle?
I'm going to request a lawyer to talk to you, actually.
There you go. Then we'll have a lawyer talk to you.
Hey, sir, did you not just hear him talk about buying child?
He admitted there's child phone. You have reasonable articulable suspicion to detain.
Yeah, that's great. We're not dads against predators, by the way. We're not those. We actually give a about this, and we want this guy arrested. Which, you know, we had this whole conversation in front of you, just basically trying to get him to say it loud that he. Alex.
And what's your name? Okay. So I understand you guys have been given a cease and desist order by this attorney's office, correct?
No.
Okay, no.
We're not.
Here's the thing. What you need to do is take all this information you have on him, okay? Take it down to Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, to the Winston-Salem Police Department. Give that to them, and let our detectives do an investigation.
In this particular case, law enforcement was provided with everything they could have possibly needed, from an uncoerced confession to probable cause and clear evidence spoken by the would-be offender, and yet the officer categorically refused to do his job. And it's clear that the primary reason for this refusal is because this law enforcement officer believes that these journalists couldn't possibly help secure justice, that they are nothing more than armchair detectives who think they know better when they don't. But far too often, that couldn't be further from the truth. This organization, led by Alex Rosen, has secured arrests in almost every state throughout the entirety of the U.S. And his efforts have also helped secure convictions in over a dozen more. It could be argued that his organization, as well as others like it, have single-handedly brought more awareness and justice to the issue of protecting our children than comparable-sized law enforcement agencies with far more resources and manpower. So if these groups are so effective, why do some law enforcement officers react this way? Well, I believe the answer is simple. It's arrogance. It's ego, and the worst part of it all, it's law enforcement's misplaced belief that educated members of the public could not possibly assist them. And it's because of this belief that allows for offenders to stay free, furthering the risk that they will harm someone else. And when we have this many people falling for the traps that Alex and his team sets on a daily basis, we have a problem that is clearly beyond the capacity of law enforcement to handle. Otherwise, Alex and his team wouldn't be making near daily content, catching hundreds of people every single year. But I will admit something. DA Rourke is right. I am not a law enforcement professional.
Agreed.
And I don't have the experience or training that the law enforcement officers who interviewed Nichol Kessinger had. Which is precisely why I spoke to one of the most experienced and knowledgeable law enforcement professionals in the country. Detective Jason Frey served as a homicide detective for the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department for over 22 years. He also served our country honorably in the military and spent his career maintaining a 100% conviction rate on every case that he personally handled. Each and every time law enforcement had a difficult case, Detective Frey was brought in and would use his wealth of knowledge to obtain a confession and ultimately a conviction. And throughout his career, he testified in over 2,000 cases as an expert witness and has worked as a consultant for local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies throughout the entire United States. So it would be something of an understatement to say that if anyone knows better, it's him. During our hour-long discussion, we discussed the facts of the case surrounding Nichol Kessinger's statements to law enforcement. Detective Frey had taken the time to observe Nichol's interviews prior to our discussion, and coupled with his years of experience, he explained exactly what he believed law enforcement did wrong with regard to their handling of Nichol Kessinger.
There were multiple things that caught my attention as an investigator and one who conducted hundreds of interview interrogations. Some of the things that really got my attention was her father being in the room and the fact that he ended up dominating that interview process.
But yet the people like myself behind Criminal Minds, 10 for Life, 50 States of Madness, ATS News, CDT News, all the bigger YouTube channels, Christina, I mean, all of us have said it. And yet we're junior detectives sitting behind our stupid keyboards and microphones, don't know anything because we're not educated, but yet we're wrong.
Agreed. That was my sentiment as well. So based on your experience as a seasoned detective, have you personally ever seen an adult witness this closely connected to the perpetrator, someone who had not yet been cleared by law enforcement, be allowed to bring their father who proceeds to dominate important parts of this interview? Is that something you have personally ever seen or witnessed?
No, that is not something that we would normally see. In general, we want to talk to a witness by themselves so they're not being influenced one way or another. And with her father directing the investigator of how the investigation was going to be conducted was very alarming to me.
Alarming is something of an understatement, which leads me to my next question. Had you been in that position and not Detective Kobach, would you have immediately dealt with the problem of her father continually interrupting the interview and intervened in some way?
It was the investigator's option to redirect and or counter at that time and or reschedule an interview without the father present.
Okay, so it would have been advantageous for law enforcement to have stopped the interview and either rescheduled it or asked Dwayne Kessinger to leave. Which brings up an important follow-up question. Was there anything in your observations of Nichol Kessinger's mannerisms during the interview that stood out to you in light of your prior experience?
When we look at an interview and or an interrogation, we're taking the total picture of everything that's going on in front of us. We're looking at their body mannerisms. Are they clenching their hands in front of them to close off? Are they being open, keeping their hands open and responding in a normal cadence or a normal timely fashion to answer? Or the opposite, are they being very difficult and to get any response out of them, the response of them being vague and needing to be redirected. Another thing that I saw was what I would refer to as a mental health clinician is inappropriate affect. So her demeanor did not match her statements.
That's so interesting that you comment on her demeanor, because that was one of the first things I noticed in my own analysis of her interviews. Now, one of the most common retorts that I've read in my own comment section from those defending Nichol Kessinger is that she didn't have to cooperate or speak to law enforcement at all. But that isn't true, because then she would have made herself an obvious suspect. So, based on her inappropriate affect and her demeanor, would that have caused you to want to then start the process of verifying all of her statements to ensure that she was in fact telling the truth?
A couple responses for that. First off, she would have been a person of interest for me because of her relationship with Chris and her ways in which she was answering questions. The second part I'd say is that when I train new investigators, we look to build a case that stands on its own without a confession, because confessions can be lost on appeal or different ways where maybe Miranda becomes an issue. So for me, it's always building a solid case without that confession. And the only way to do that is to chase down all the loose ends. And with Nichol, there's obviously a lot of loose ends there that should have been, cleaned up.
So she should have been treated as a person of interest from the beginning, especially in light of the fact that she deleted all traces of Chris Watts from her cell phone. And speaking of Nichol's cell phone, the discovery evidence obtained from law enforcement stated that they did not have the technology needed to extract all of Nichol's data from her iPhone. So based on your knowledge of law enforcement's available technology in 2018 to the present, is it still possible to retrieve the data she deleted from her cell phone?
Two parts to that one. I'm going to disagree with the law enforcement assessment on that, because although they may not have had the technology, there are different levels. So we have the local police and or sheriff department, we have the state police, and then we have the federal police, so the FBI. There's multiple agencies that could have gone through and done a phone dump for analysis. Plus, there are search warrants that could have been done, depending on who her provider is, that could have basically made a clone phone and have all the evidence without physically having the phone. And, I'm going to say if it's still in evidence, there's still a good chance that, it can still be retrieved from the actual physical phone. And there could be other detections on it for maybe some hidden vaults, such as communication apps and things like that.
Wow, that's incredible. So not only is it possible to retrieve all of her deleted data, but it's been possible this entire time, which everyone has always suspected, but we've all been told by the DA that we are just junior detectives who wrongly think we know better. So to hear from someone who actually knows better that law enforcement responsible for this case dropped the ball is incredibly reaffirming to so many thousands of people who have taken interest in this case. Detective Frey, what else did you notice in your observations of Nichol's interviews that stood out to you?
So, Edward, what we're looking at is the homicide of 4 people. If we look at what should be a person's appropriate demeanor when being questioned about 4 murders, it should not be joyful and giddy and with flirtatious eyes towards the investigator. Even if this was a stranger, there still should be some amount of respect for the fact that 4 people were killed.
I simply could not agree with you more. Nichol's affect and demeanor during these interviews with law enforcement are the epitome of inappropriate, suspicious, and the very reason why so many people initially began to suspect her involvement.
You can see her
And I want to thank Detective Frey for his willingness to come forward and speak on these issues that has affected the lives of millions of people all across the world. His words are reaffirming and powerful and speak to the heart of this entire case. At the conclusion of my discussion with Detective Frey, I was genuinely in a state of shock. For what feels like far more than 5 years, law enforcement in this case has gaslit the public into the false narrative that they completed their job by securing the conviction of Chris Watts alone, that they did not owe us anything further, and that justice had been done.
No.
But Detective Frey's words are the proof that all of us have always suspected all along, but that we could never definitively prove. And one of the most significant facts being that law enforcement always had the ability to retrieve all of the data and simply chose not to. All of the apps that Nichol and Chris were using to communicate, and everything that she was so clearly desperate to hide. Because no matter what anyone has said in defense of Nichol Kessinger, one thing remains true to those of us with any modicum of common sense. A truly innocent person who has nothing whatsoever to hide does not disappear into thin air, never to be heard from again.
Amen, brother.
Do you know how I know that? Because Detective Jason Frey is the brother of Amber Frey, the woman who helped secure the conviction of Scott Peterson. An honorable woman of integrity who never needed to change her story, to lie, or to manipulate law enforcement into accepting a version of a story that requires literal blinders in order to believe. The Freys are a family who understand the importance of honor, and Amber Frey is an example of what it looks like to be someone with character that stands the test of time, something that Nichol Kessinger is completely devoid of. So now that we know from a professional who knows better, a reaffirming truth that many of us already believed, what can we do now to ensure justice? When I first started writing this episode, I spent countless hours painstakingly examining all of the details from Nichol Kessinger's interviews and the discovery evidence, trying to find every little piece of the puzzle that would further prove that she was lying. But after compiling all of the facts that further impeached her credibility, I realized something important. I realized that creating another episode further impeaching the credibility of Nichol Kessinger would be completely pointless. Because no amount of evidence is ever going to change the opinion of District Attorney Michael Rourke if the enormity of what has already been exposed has not in any way swayed his opinion. And after listening to his remarks on his wife's podcast, it's clear to me that he has absolutely no intention of ever opening an investigation into Nichol Kessinger. Regardless of what evidence is uncovered, the petitions we sign, or how often we ask him to reconsider. Which is precisely why we need to understand the path in front of us and what it will actually take to help advocate for justice.
I have an idea. Understand the road ahead. I have an idea.
Weld County is in northern Colorado and is largely a conservative stronghold, politically speaking. So much so that in 2013, Weld County commissioners started a campaign to secede Weld County from the state of Colorado. I cannot stress enough how uncommon a measure like this is, specifically for a county to want to remove itself from the state that it resides in, primarily due to political motivations. Now, ultimately, the measure failed at the time, but just 2 years ago in 2021, a petition was started by a group known as Weld County, Wyoming, and their goal was to have Weld County once again secede from Colorado and become a territory of Wyoming. And again, this is largely because of the fact that Weld County is so incredibly conservative, and the governor of the state of Colorado is a left-leaning Democrat. And to be clear, I am not pointing this out to disparage anyone who resides there, but rather to explain the political climate that exists. But you may be asking, why does any of that matter? Well, conservative regions of the U.S. historically place considerable value on district attorneys like Michael Rourke, precisely because of his high conviction rate, praising him for being a no-nonsense, hard-nosed prosecutor, and the fact that he is also very openly conservative, a man who does not shy away from making political statements, which is precisely why he has run for office unopposed by anyone in Weld County from either side of the political aisle. But next year in the 2024 election, if DA Rourke runs again and wins, it would be his third and final 4-year term as the district attorney of Weld County. And all of this matters for one central reason. Justice can only happen if and when someone runs for that office who is willing to open an investigation into Nichol Kessinger.
Please.
That means working together at the local level within Weld County to speak with future candidates for that position and to encourage them to consider the body of evidence against her, which is precisely why I have spent the last 3 months of my life putting together a comprehensive compilation of the discovery evidence that I have found that definitively proves that Nichol Kessinger should have been a person of interest and is deserving of a formal investigation.
Yes.
Facts that I have compiled from law enforcement's own discovery records. Details that I will share with each and every new DA who occupies that position from now until the day that someone agrees to investigate this case properly. I believe that in a case like this, now more than ever, justice is our advocacy for it. By presenting the facts, by avoiding conspiracies, by refusing to attack or demean family members or any party attached and associated to this case, and by giving others the opportunity to discover the evidence for themselves.
Amen.
And the enormity of what went wrong in this case. In the same way that Detective Michael Prill walked into DA Rourke's office all those years ago, convincing him that John Sandoval needed to be held accountable for the crimes he committed, despite the fact that they were lacking all of the vital evidence that they knew they needed. They proceeded with the prosecution anyway. District Attorney Michael Rourke may have turned his back on justice, but we won't. And I truly believe that same day is possible for those of us who believe that this is worth the fight. Because if you could sum up my one singular reason for why I will always advocate for justice for Shanann, for Bella, for Cece, and for Nico, my answer will always be just one word. Allison. Allison was the most precious little girl I had ever laid my eyes on. And from the moment she was born, she was the light of our entire family. She was the first child to my cousin James and his wife, and every single time I saw her, whether it was in pictures or in person, her smile seemed to radiate the love that she had for absolutely everyone around her. Growing up, James and I were close. And anytime my family came into town, he and I were always together. It's why when we became adults and he told the family that they were expecting their first child, I knew that he would never be the same because he had always wanted to be a father, if only so that he could be a better father than the one that was modeled for him. Later that same year, I made the long drive into town. It was cold, and there was a fresh snow covering the mountains. Walking into my grandmother's home, I felt the warmth from her fireplace, and almost immediately I heard the sound of Allison's cooing, her laughter filling the room with this unspeakable joy. You couldn't help but smile around her, and I still remember the way that she smiled at me when I walked through the door. I was a perfect stranger to her, but one that she welcomed like I was someone that she already loved. You wouldn't have needed to ask him how much he loved his daughter. You only needed to see the way that she looked at him. As time passed, she grew into a precocious toddler, a daddy's girl, a child who loved her family fiercely and was always at the center of every family picture, at every gathering. She was the light. She was the best of us. I can tell you with perfect clarity exactly where I was when I got the call that would change our family forever. Sitting in my office, I noticed my mother was calling. I answered the phone and she spoke James's name. And for just a moment, I thought maybe it was news of Allison's first steps, but the language my mother spoke was foreign. I knew the words, but my heart refused to understand them. And like a wrecking ball, her words shattered a world that lay in ruins in the expanse of a single phone call. A tragedy that I instantly knew would completely destroy everything James was or had ever hoped to be. He and his wife had a tumultuous relationship with her family, or specifically, her grandmother. They were on two different ideological sides of the spectrum, religiously speaking. So, in an effort to bridge familial ties, he reluctantly allowed his grandmother-in-law to take Allison out on a few afternoon errands. It was midday and summertime in the Southwest. And by the time that someone came running into the grocery store screaming that a child had been left inside of a car, it was already too late. She was gone. First responders were never able to resuscitate her. But if somehow all of this tragedy wasn't enough, those same first responders told members of our family that they had detected a strong odor of alcohol on the grandmother's breath. A woman who we learned after the fact had been battling alcoholism for years. In that community, she was a woman who was well respected, revered, and was a devout member of the local Mormon church. It was a church that key members of law enforcement and all of the responding officers also attended. So when news came that they had declined to even conduct an investigation or an interview of the grandmother, it set into motion a chain of events that would absolutely destroy my cousin's soul. He was just 27 years old when he died from liver failure due to his overwhelming grief from the loss of his daughter, from the loss of Allison. And the reason that I tell you this story now is because it would be so easy to give in to the notion that justice never came, to allow the lie to set in that our advocacy doesn't truly matter, and that sometimes the best thing we can do is to just give up. But do you know how I know that justice for Allison is real? Because now, all of these years later, you know her story. A story that may not have resulted in an arrest, but out of the ashes of that tragedy, a seed was planted in honor of her life that has become a legacy to her, to James, and to my family. Because the injustice that came from her death has blossomed into the inspiration for every word that I write. And the loss of Allison taught me something deeply important about unresolved tragedy. Sometimes justice demands more from us than we could have ever imagined. And the loss of those we love leaves a chasm that can never be replaced. But each and every time I see these moments between a mother and her children, every time I hear the loving affirmations to Bella, to Cece, every time I see Allison in their eyes, and we choose to honor them by remembering them, by speaking their names, by refusing the lie that justice is impossible.
not.
But even as we close this chapter of their story, we cannot forget that there are still pages that have yet to be written. And I truly believe that speaking the truth about this case keeps justice alive. And the truth will ensure that no matter how much time passes, that their lives, their stories, and the impact that they have had on each of us will ensure that justice is only a matter of time.
This video broke me.
In closing today, I want to thank you for taking the time just to be here, for listening. I know it was a long wait, but this video took far longer than I ever imagined it would. The last several months have been more challenging than I ever expected. After struggling through COVID and recovering from a difficult surgery, my family recently suffered a life-changing tragedy that I am still trying to recover from. And while all of that was happening, I knew that people were waiting for this video, and I also knew that people's expectations for it were considerable. But I made up my mind that I would make something that I could be proud of.
Bravo.
Something that would honor Shanann, Bella, Cece, Nico, and Allison. And I know that I've said that this is the last Chris Watts video, and unless there is major news in his case, it will be. But it will not be the last video concerning Nichol Kessinger. I wanted to use this last installment to show the audience something important that many people need to know. That we have to shift our focus from asking DA Rourke to do something that he just will not do, and putting our attention onto the future and how we can advocate for justice for each and every new person who occupies that position. Because I truly mean it when I say that I believe that justice, it's only a matter of time.
Amen.
Now, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of the new subscribers from Patreon and on YouTube.
Go give him
I
some
know
love, guys.
it can be difficult to wait on my incessant need to get these videos right, but I promise my goal is to make something worth waiting for. And I want you to know that I see your incredibly positive words of encouragement, your support, and all the ways that you inspire me to create content with my whole heart. Now, I want to specifically thank each of our Patreon and YouTube supporters. Every single one of you are the reason why I create content like this, why it's possible. Sadly, true crime content on YouTube is almost always demonetized or heavily restricted. And because of that, creators like myself are often forced to pursue subscription-based programs, which become the primary mechanism for supporting our work. Every single Patreon and YouTube supporter is directly responsible for the content that you see on this channel.
Exactly.
I truly would not be here if it wasn't for each of you. So when I tell you how grateful I am, I truly and sincerely mean those words. Now, I want to give a special thank you to Peter and his adorable cat, Snooky, as well as all of our producers who made this video, this series possible.
Fantastic job.
Over the next few weeks, I'll be debuting new series covering Chandler Halderson, Gabby Petito, Colonel Russell Williams, as well as several new cases not previously seen on the channel.
Okay.
Details for when those will be released will be posted to the community page, and I already cannot wait to share each of those new series with you. Now, before I go, I want to say one last thing. This channel has been around for a little over a year, and I genuinely cannot believe how much has changed since we started. Thank you for choosing to be a part of this journey with me, for supporting this channel and me the way that you have. I hope that each of you had an amazing holiday season, and know from the bottom of my heart that your support It quite literally means the world to me. And as always, this has been Behind Criminal Minds. We'll see you next time.
I tell you what right now, Criminal Minds, you broke me. I don't think I've cried this much in my life for a content, video, movie, besides, I think, Saving Private Ryan. But for this man to do what he just did, I commend him for it. We do this for our kids. Our kids are our future. And it's not just, I want to do this for Shanann. I want to do it for Shanann. But that little Bella, that little Cece, that little baby Nico deserved the world. They deserved their father. They deserved their mother. And for that to be taken and removed and annihilated because of their father and this woman, and then the woman gets up. Not even that. She got away scot-free because he didn't want to do it. I can tell you exactly what he wants to say. And I'm not going to say it because of legal reasons why. But we can change the future. We can appoint somebody in that position and change and alter things. So when I tell you that if you live in that county, that state, you can make a difference. You can alter this case. There is justice in the future, in time. But all you got to do is, I guarantee you know what to do. I'm not going to say it. Or like he stated. He didn't say it completely, but we know what you guys have to do. We know what we have to do for justice. And we're not going to find it with D.A. Rourke. So, with that being said, like he said, I appreciate every single one of you. We do this because we want justice. We don't do this because we're some needy little person between or behind a anonymous keyboard and we have nothing better to do and we're just junior detectives. We want to do what's right, and this is not right, what had happened. They dropped the ball. Every one of them should be fired that dropped the ball on this. I know I'm probably an ugly crier. I don't know how many people are still here. This is a very long video. This is probably my longest video I've ever made. And I'm not going to stop. I'm going to continue. You can best believe I'm going to continue with different cases. I'm going to continue with Nichol Kessinger. You can best believe if you're watching this, Nicole, I'm not going to stop. Because you know what you did wrong. And I don't know how many people are religious or what your belief is in. But if you don't get your how do I say this? If she's not taken care of here, she will be taken in the afterlife. That's all I have to say. I will continue, but again, I thank every single one of you from the bottom of my heart how far we've come. You guys have literally changed my life. The amount of positivity that's been fantastic, but there comes negativity and destruction on my behalf. And I don't usually let it come out, but it's been hard, but I'm not going to stop. So again, I thank you all for being here. Don't forget to subscribe for more content. Hit the like button for that justice. The justice will prevail in time, unfortunately. But you know what to do for those people that live in that area. And we will see you guys in the next video. So please take care, keep it safe, and as always, keep nerding on. And we will see you guys next time.